Dr. Murray, welcome to Columbus. So glad to have you.
Dr. Mahan, it's a pleasure being back. We're really looking forward to doing these mounds. Would you tell the viewers just a little bit about those mounds and the unique parts concerning them?
Well,
it's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I will indeed. Behind me is the Columbus Museum, which we are happy to say is one of the finest of its kind in the Southeast. It has several distinctive collections and features, one of which is the collection of material relating to the Yuchi Indians and to their history. It also has, I think, the unique distinction of owning one of the large southeastern temple mound complexes, which was given to it years ago by the owners in order for those mounds to be protected and eventually to be studied and, of course, in association with the people themselves who were parts of the mounds. Those people were the Yuchis and the Seminoles, and I'm happy to say that the museum does have splendid relations with both. Now, the story you're going to see this morning is the application that the museum has made in cooperation with the Institute for the Study of American Cultures to secure a grant to do planning for a real teaching institution at the mounds. So before you go to Lumpkin, which is 40 miles south of here, I just want once again to welcome you to Columbus. Thank you.
Yeah. Good, I don't know. Part of it. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to present to you Mr. Frank Snell with the Columbus Museum. Thank you for allowing us to come along on your class here.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed having the people down here to see this very important place.
Right, and we're going to put some plugs in for you and let people know what you're doing here, and it's admirable, and we're certainly with you 100%. Thank you for allowing us to tail along.
Well, thank you. You folks have the rare opportunity of being the largest group we've ever managed to get down here. And I think you'll discover that this is a fascinating place. Margie's passing out some maps to you. We know this site as the Moye archaeological site. It was once a very important Indian town, political and religious center, dating to the 12, 13, and 1400s, very early 1400s. We don't know what they called it themselves because it's before written history, and so we just sort of have to give them names. Very often they'll be named in honor of the landowners, and that's how this site acquired its name. The Singer and Moye families owned this property for many generations, and back in the late 1960s, they donated the site, the archaeological site, to the Columbus Museum as a research and education center. Over the years, we've conducted excavations here at different times when we had people and funds that allowed us to do that. And we learned a great deal. We've learned, for instance, that this site is at least as important as such famous places as Etowah or Kolomoki, or even the Okmulgee Fields mounds over there at Okmulgee National Monument. All three of those are National Historic Landmarks. And as a matter of fact, this site right here is in the process of being nominated as a National Historic Landmark. If you're familiar with the National Historic Register, that's a step above being on the National Register. It's recognized throughout the country for its significance. Actually, if we wanted to talk about the beginnings of this site, we would have to go back 2,000 years. When we first began our investigations here, we thought that the site was, quote, only 1,000 years old. But in some of our first tests, we found evidence for a still earlier culture of Indians that lived here about 2,000 years ago. We don't know much about them yet. It's partly because it was a small village, and the size of the big Indian town that was built here 1,000 years later just sort of overwhelms that earlier evidence. So all I can tell you about that is it was about 2,000 years ago, and it was related to other Indian cultures that we've discovered over on the Chattahoochee River banks and up and down the river. The overwhelming population and period of occupation for this site dates from around 900 AD up until shortly after 1400 AD. The reason we know that is through a combination of things. One of them is there are similarities between the culture of Indians that lived here and other cultures that lived over on the river, and we have some radiocarbon dates from there. For those of you not familiar with radiocarbon dating, that's a process using nuclear physics where you can actually determine the age within a certain reasonable margin of error of how long ago a tree was cut or an animal died or something like that. We have two radiocarbon dates from here, one from the Earth Lodge on the north end of the site, and I'll show you that a little bit later. That date is about 1270 AD, somewhere in about the middle of the occupation of the site. The latest date, the most recent date that we ever got from the site is that second date. If you want to go, you can go up to the top of this mound. Believe it or not, this is all built by human labor. This big hill right here is what we call Mound A of the Singer site, or the Singer Mound. It's on near the southern end of the site. You'll see on your map there. And this was where El Primo, where the supreme chief probably lived, and it's quite possibly where the most important religious building was placed, up on top of the mound. And in fact, back in 1972, we excavated on the top of this mound and uncovered the foundations for one of those buildings. Interestingly enough, it's the largest prehistoric Indian building that we've ever found in our excavations here in the Chattahoochee Valley over a period of about 50 years. It's about 40 feet square. It's 4 times larger than a normal Indian house. But going back to the age of the site, one of the things that's important for us, unfortunate for the Indians, was that Indian building up there on top of this mound burned. And when it burned, of course, if a building just decays away, like the Earth Lodge that I'll show you on the north end of the mound, there is nothing left really of that building except the clay they may have used in the construction and stains in the soil. But if the building burns, it leaves behind charcoal. The charred wood will be preserved for hundreds or thousands of years. And that's what happened up here. Charcoal is one of those things we used in radiocarbon dating. And we took a sample from one of the main roof supports of that building, and the University of Georgia Laboratory of Radiocarbon Dating told us that the tree that was used to support the roof of that house, or that building, was cut in about 1390 AD. We think really that's very close to the last period of the occupation of this site. That's 100 years before Columbus discovered America, and I would suspect that this town had been abandoned for at least 50 years by the time Columbus discovered America. In other words, somewhere around 1450 or so, this site was abandoned, probably before that. For that reason, for instance, unlike some other Indian sites around here, we find no historic artifacts. We find no European trade objects. We find no steel axes or iron gun barrels or anything like that. So this is purely what we call a prehistoric site. But remember, prehistory only means that it's before written history. One of the important things about archaeology is archaeologists really write history based on the evidence that they find in the ground. I've always liked to compare archaeology to detective work, because archaeologists and detectives work in exactly the same manner and basically for the same result. They go out, they gather evidence, and use that evidence to reconstruct an event or a series of events that took place in the past. With a detective, it's a crime. With an archaeologist, it's all aspects of life, from everyday life of cooking food to the grandest ceremonies that may have been performed here at the Moye site. Over the years, we've dug in several places: the building on top of this mound, the earth lodge at the north end of the site, and others. While you've got your map there, let's go through that just a little bit. One of the things that you'll notice on the drawing of Mound A is that there are two ramps that come down from the sides. Here's one of them right here. Obviously, that's a very steep side to this mound, and to make it easier to climb up and down, they built these ramps going up, one out toward the northeast, one down toward the southwest from the top of this mound. They probably had wooden, it may have been clay steps going up the side there. Of course, we don't have that good advantage now, so I strongly encourage you to hang on to the side, that rope that goes up the side of the mound if you should decide to climb up to the top. While I'm speaking of dangers, let me mention two other things. One of them is don't fall down the side of the mound. Three things. Don't fall down the side of the mound. And if you're susceptible for poison ivy, be very, very careful, because there's a lot of it around here. We've tried to cut and remove as much as possible, but there's still a lot of it around. That's a great big poison ivy monster right there on that tree that we killed not too long ago. The third thing, and I'm sorry I have to bring this up, is snakes. There are snakes around here. If you're out in the woods, that's one of the things you have to keep in mind. We have seen very few poisonous snakes, but we have seen them. And I probably shouldn't say this because it might discourage people from climbing the mound, but the last one we saw was on top of the mound up there. So they're not just down in the lowlands here somewhere. Keep your eye peeled. But those are the only three real dangers, other than don't fall down a armadillo hole or something. Like everywhere else in southwest Georgia and southeast Alabama, we've been overrun with armadillos now, and you'll see little rooted out spots all over the place from where they've been grubbing. But let's get back to the Moye site and the archaeology of the area. Mound A is the main mound on the site. One of the things that's not shown in that map is that the whole lay of the land slopes down from north to south. And that presents us with several unique features about this site that I've never seen anywhere else. And I've worked in a good part of the eastern United States and the Midwest. And that is, every one of these mounds is higher on the south side than it is on the north side. Give you an example, that's pretty impressive there. Looking up at this mound, that's about 37 or 38 feet high. But if you go to the south side of the mound, it's closer to 47 or 48 feet high because the earth, the general lay of the land slopes down. You may have noticed when you went around this little mound here, it looks much higher from this side than it did from the other side. The Indians, of course, were making the tops of the mounds perfectly level, and when the ground sloped, it ended up with an arrangement like that. The Indians obviously were very good engineers. You notice Mound D at the top of your map. They also were people who didn't do unnecessary work. Now this mound is built entirely by human labor, one basket full at a time. There must be several hundred cubic feet of earth, several thousand cubic feet of earth inside of this mound. We've never done a calculation on it, but it involves a huge amount of human labor. Mound D up there at the north end of the site, in terms of surface area, is even larger than this one, although it's not as high.
Mound D's not marked.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The unmarked mound there at the north end of the site is even larger than Mound A in surface area. As a matter of fact, to give you some sense of scale, Mound D up there at the north end is about the size of a football field.
Is that it, Frank? That straight ahead?
No, it's right up straight north of us this way. This is Mound B, as in Baker, over here. Mound D, as in dog, is up at the north end of the site. That one's about 10 feet high on the south side and only a foot or so high on the north side. So it's the most extreme example of this difference in height in order to make the top level. The thing that surprised us when we tested that mound is we discovered that it was not entirely a product of human labor. The Indians were very sharp. They took a natural ridge that was there and just squared it off and made it into a platform, so it has very little fill dirt in it, unlike this one right here. So with a minimum amount of work, they managed to make a nice, big, impressive mound up there. Mounds E and G are the two mounds that we didn't really know what to expect. Most of the mounds of the era that these were built are large flat-top platforms like this one, Mound D, Mound C, B, F, and so forth. And they were built primarily for one purpose, and that was to have buildings on top of them. If I may use an analogy, you think of the pyramids of Egypt as being built primarily to bury somebody inside of them. The pyramids of Mexico and Central America, on the other hand, were primarily built as platforms that important buildings would be placed on top of them. Whether it was to place them closer to heaven or just above the level of the ordinary peons, I don't know. There can be a lot of discussion about that. But the idea is buildings were placed on top of these platforms. Well, these mounds served exactly the same purpose as the pyramids of Mexico. In fact, I've always firmly believed that they were inspired by the same historical origins. The only difference between these pyramids that we now call Mississippian Indian mounds and the Aztec and Mayan pyramids was that in Mexico and Central America, usually they faced their pyramids with stone and put stone buildings on top of them. The Indians down here didn't do that. But that's the only essential difference between these Indian mounds and Mexican pyramids. Now, I hasten to add that there are other kinds of Indian mounds. Many of the mounds at the famous Colomoke site, south of here at Colomoke State Park, are actual burial mounds. But these are predominantly what we used to call temple mounds. Although in addition to have temples on top of them, we do think that the political meeting houses were on top of them, and probably residences of the most important people in the town. To go ahead and finish, mounds E and G didn't fit this characterization. They were not flat top. They were little low dome-shaped mounds. We still don't know for sure about Mound G. It's the one the furthest south, the one we've done the least amount of investigation, and it may be simply that all the trees growing up and things have happened have disturbed it enough so it's not as clear as these. Mound E, however, clearly was not a flat top mound. And in fact, that's the first thing that we tested when we began our work here in 1967. We excavated a trench through that mound. We thought, well, maybe this was a Mississippian era burial mound, because that's what it looked like as a burial mound. Well, it turned out that we were wrong. That mound covered the remains of an ancient ceremonial building. I mentioned earlier that we got a radiocarbon date of around 1260 or 1270 AD from that building. It also turned out that it was what we know now as an earth lodge. Most of you are probably not familiar with the earth lodges of South and North Dakota. Back in the late 1950s, I was working for the Smithsonian Institution, and we excavated many of those. If you've heard of them, you've probably heard of the Earth Lodge at Okmulgee National Monument, which is a big circular building. But in the Plains, for instance, where I worked, there were both circular earth lodges and there were square and rectangular earth lodges. Well, this one up here happens to be a square earth lodge. It's the first that I know of that's ever been found in this region. Now, most of you probably asking me, what do you mean is an earth lodge? Some earth lodges, like up in the plains, were excavated by digging a hole in the ground, much larger than this one here, and then taking the dirt and building it up around the sides, putting a roof over it, and then sodding the roof, so that when you walked up on it, it just looked like a big heap of earth, much larger than this. That's what we call a semi-subterranean earth lodge. The floor was beneath the surface of the ground. The earth lodge that we have here was built at ground surface. But what they did is they went off to the edges of the site and gathered dirt, and they built heavy walls to the building, and they piled up earth around the outside of these walls to make berms like we do with our ecologically conscious buildings today as a protection against the elements. I don't think that's what they had in mind, but it was the same effect, just piling earth into a big pile up against the four outside walls, with the exception of the entranceway. Then it appears that they brought in big roof rafters and placed them over it, and quite possibly sodded it over, so that if you had walked up on that earth lodge building about 900 years ago, all you would have seen is a big hump of earth with a doorway going into it, like if you were to go to Okmulgee National Monument over near Macon today. We found all kinds of evidence that showed us how that earth lodge was built. And it was probably used for very special secret ceremonies of a small or an elite group of the people that lived in this town. Mound C and F, along with Mound A, are what we normally think of as Mississippian platform mounds. It's quite probable that both C and F, like A, had buildings on top of them. A rectangular one like Mound C may well have had two buildings. We don't know yet. We've never tested up there. Mound B is unusual. You'll notice it has two tiers to it. It has a high point that you can see over here on the western side, and I'm facing north right now. And on the eastern side is a lower platform. Probably it had two buildings there, or one on the upper and one on the lower, or whatever. We just don't know. We haven't excavated enough yet. So that covers all of the mounds on the site. But the mounds are only a part of this site. The Moye archaeological site is listed on here as Moye Mound Site, but obviously there were not just mounds here. People were living here as well, and not just the elite and the priests and the chiefs who lived on top of the mounds. There were the ordinary folks who helped support the whole infrastructure of the town here. They were living in homesteads in the immediate area and all scattered up and down Patala Creek, which is just a little to the south of us. The Moye archaeological site is unusual for several reasons, but one of them that I should mention to you is that it's so far from the river. We're about 35 or 40 miles from the river if you go by Patala Creek, and we're about 25 miles from the river as the crow flies. And Indians weren't much into flying in those days. I think that one of the major reasons for the existence of this site was that it was a frontier outpost, as well as being a major economic and social and ceremonial center. And this frontier outpost probably had as much to do with economy as everything else. You've heard me mention several times that this was the Mississippian culture. That's the name that archaeologists have given to that prehistoric culture because it seemed to have found its origins in the Mississippi Valley, and it spread out from there. Well, we are literally on the eastern outpost of that Mississippian culture. We are very close to what they call the watershed, the break between the Chattahoochee River drainage system and the Flint River drainage system. The Flint River drainage system, for almost all of prehistory, did not have the Mississippian culture. There was another culture that we call the woodland culture in existence on the Flint River at the same time the Moye site was being built by the people of the Mississippian culture. And so this was a frontier location, probably very important economically, because one of the reasons that this was the frontier of the Mississippian culture is the Mississippian culture was built on agriculture. And this is as far east as you could go and effectively grow corn, beans, squash, and other kinds of crops with the kind of agricultural technology that the Indians had in prehistoric times. This soil is good for that. The soil over on the Flint River is not. It's far too sandy and sterile. But there were probably many things produced in the Flint River Valley and on eastward that didn't come from here, things that were good in the sandy river valley. And so probably this was a main trading site between the Indians of the other culture to the east and things that people of the Mississippian culture traveling all the way westward to Oklahoma needed. So I think it was very important from that standpoint as well. There are 1,000 things I've left out. As a matter of fact, I could keep going on talking forever and we wouldn't have any time left. So I think what I should do right now is see if anybody has any questions. Yes?
How did you come to find out about this area?
This archaeological site has been known for many, many years. Matter of fact, I got off on what they call a wild goose chase one time. There was a historical article written saying that Andrew Jackson had visited this site. And you know, because of the historical implications, I got all excited about that and did some research on it. I discovered that one of the main routes during the Seminole Wars, which of course one of the places where Andrew Jackson made his fame, passed by within just about a half a mile of here. And I went back to the original documents and I went back to that article. Unfortunately, it turned out that the person who wrote the article said, well, if he came within a half a mile of here, surely he must have come over and visited the Indians that were living here. Of course, one little detail, the Indians had been gone from here for several hundred years. So he may have visited here, but there would have been nothing to attract him other than to wonder at the mounds like we do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they've probably been known for a very long time. They are marked on many of the earliest maps of the region. And on the state highway maps, the county maps, it's been marked from long ago. And on the modern Geological Survey topographic maps, it's marked. So it's been known for a long time.
Was that land cleared by recent?
That land was cleared by two people. Where are they?
Oh, okay.
We have two volunteers that have worked very hard and very faithfully for a number of years doing this clearing right here. Up until just a few years ago, it was more grown up than you see over there. It's been a phenomenal undertaking for them, and it's amazing what they have accomplished. But by doing that, you can see far, far more than has ever been seen of this archaeological site. And they're continuing to work. You can see the piles of brush that'll be burned when it's safe to burn them, and we'll eventually get the whole site cleared and make it much more accessible and much more visible to the visiting public like this.
Think they would be in effect soon?
We're pedaling as hard as we can go. We hope in the very near future. As a matter of fact, we have plans for a major project down here if we can get adequate funding to open it up further, to make it accessible to the public, and really start a formal educational program down here in archaeology. That's right, yeah. And we plan to make it a versatile kind of program. One of the things we hope to have down here is an archaeological field school. Most archaeological field schools are intended for college students. And we want to make it available for college students, but we want to also make it available for anyone who would like to come and learn about how archaeology is done and about the prehistory and early history of the region that can be unveiled through archaeology. We have had a number of field schools down here, brief, one-shot deals. Matter of fact, we're going to have one next month. I usually try to restrict it to kids who are 16 and older, from 16 to 86 or somewhere in that neighborhood. The reason I say that is you can't imagine how overpowering the urge is for almost any person under 16 to run up and down the sides of the Indian Mound.
Frank, are you speaking of the one at the museum, July 12th?
That's right, yeah. The museum will be having an archaeological field school.
July 12th through the 16th, Monday through Friday, and sign up if you want to take it. It's $65, I think, per week.
They come back and forth each day?
That's right, we come back and forth each day. We don't have residential facilities here yet, unfortunately. The best we can offer is a porta potty, and yes.
You talked about the mounds as being bases for buildings. Have you excavated any burial sites?
We have never found an Indian burial on this site. That doesn't mean that they aren't here. It's just, you have to realize that we're talking about a 42-acre area of land, and we have probably excavated less than 1% of that. Also, I might add that we don't necessarily deliberately go hunting for Indian burials, because although that's important, that's only a small part of the overall picture. We have gotten all kinds of very important information from all of our other excavations as well. Whether it to be about the buildings, their architecture, or whether it be about their ceramic crafts, the fragments of pottery we find, or whether it be about their subsistence. For instance, one of the clusters of charcoal we found up there in that earth lodge was where some poor soul, back around 1270 AD, burned their stew. And I don't know whether they were embarrassed or what, but instead of just throwing it outside, they dug a little hole in the floor of the building and buried it underneath the floor. We found the stain, the darker stain of the soil, and excavated it out. And in there we found charred corn kernels, charred beans, a couple of charred pumpkin seeds, some what are known as chenopodium seeds. It's another kind of plant food that we don't eat today, and some little slivers of turkey and deer bone. So it must have been a pretty good stew, although you'd have to watch out for the bones.
Well, do you have, it's always been my understanding that most of the burials were done in mounds.
No, only with some, well, matter of fact, most of the burials were not done in mounds in any cultures. Kolomoki is the most famous site. It's famous for its burial mounds that were excavated back in the late 1940s, early 1950s. That was only the elite of the town that they found in those burial mounds. The vast majority of people were simply buried out in the village. In later times, it was a very common custom to bury somebody beneath the floor of the house in which they died, apparently. We know that from the very earliest historical accounts. And a lot of the later ones, we find the graves beneath the floor of the houses. With other cultures, we don't know. Now, we used to make a joke back in the late 1950s. I was working for the University of Georgia, and we excavated a place called the Mandeville site, and did extensive excavations out in the village and so forth, and in some of the mounds. One of the mounds was a burial mound. We found evidence for the interment of about a half a dozen people there, but we never found, in all the extensive work we did, another human bone. We used to joke about how they must have put them in canoes and floated them down the creek or something. But really what it probably boils down to is a combination of factors. The fact that still we only dig a very small fraction of a site, plus the fact that in southwest Georgia and southeast Alabama, the soils are frequently very acid and the bones just completely dissolve away. But again, let me reinforce, we most of the time are not looking for burials. We encounter them and we study them and excavate them. But what we're looking for is history that we can reconstruct based on the evidence that we find in the ground. Any other questions? Well, before my voice gives out, I'm going to let y'all's lungs give out, and anybody who wants to climb to the top of the mountain, please be cautious, mainly about slipping and falling down. If you got the rope, just hang on to the top of it, and you'll get some good views. What's our time?
It's 10:35.
Yeah.
We're gonna go over and see the dig.
Yeah.
Before they come back.
Yeah. Well, when they come back down. Yeah.
here before one of the major mounds at this site. And I want to introduce you to someone that can tell us a little of the recent history on this particular property, and any information that he might be willing to share with us. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Mac Moye. It's a pleasure having, real good, it's a pleasure having you out today. I'm going to let you just take this mic and tell us a little bit about the history and the property and so forth.
Well, this property has been in my family from about 1870 or so up until about 1966. It had been farmed, a good bit of it had been farmed over the years, and so there was maybe some of the mounds weren't as noticeable as might have been if they weren't. My dad acquired the property and from a relative of his, and he recognized it for being what it is, a major archaeological site. Another part of the site was owned by another family, the Singer family, and in 1965 they got together and decided that maybe the Columbus Museum ought to receive the property in order to perpetuate it for its historical and educational value. So they deeded a large section of the property to the Columbus Museum at that time. And the Columbus Museum had several archaeological digs over the next several summers. However, grant money gave out, and eventually it occurred to us that maybe we ought to try another avenue to get some money. So last year we heard about a program, a federal program that was putting money into the state departments of transportation, and at that point a group of us got together and began to put together a proposal for that purpose. And what we have done is to develop an idea for an archaeological field school. This would be a teaching school for archaeologists, and in particular for departments of transportation that have archaeologists with them. We have it in stages. In our first stage, we have submitted the proposal for the first stage for about a $15,000 program to do a study to see about the feasibility. If that's funded, then we will go ahead with a larger idea, and eventually we hope to open this site to the public for not only its archaeological value, but also for its ecological value. Directly behind me, about a quarter to a half of a mile, is Patola Creek. Patola Creek is an ecologically important area. There are any number of species of wildlife and vegetation there that need protection. We have identified an area from here to the creek, and then down the creek about 2 miles, and then from the creek that point to the south to a set of limestone caves that we are trying to identify all together as being one ecological and archaeological site. This is a large area, but we believe it's sensitive and important for a variety of reasons.
Well, fantastic. Can we be invited back as this project continues and develops, maybe like on a dig or something of that nature?
Yes, sir. We would be delighted to have you come back and see the progress. We are very excited about it, and being that this is the only major Indian mound site that's not owned by a government in the state of Georgia, we have a little bit of latitude in how the site progresses, so we feel like that we will be able to allow the public more access.
Well, fantastic. Do you have anything else you'd like to add or just share some opinions? Doesn't have to be documented, just opinions of what was here and maybe how they lived. And we like to discuss things without saying this has got to be documented right to the core, because it's the way people learn. And a person that has been on site and has that has opinions. I think it's wonderful if we could just share those. I just wonder if you might have some opinion or conclusion that you'd like to share with us on the area.
Well, I grew up here. My home is about 4 or 5 miles north of here. And it was just a natural thing for us to come down here on a Sunday afternoon and look around and enjoy the property. There, about a mile west of here, was a field an agricultural field that my family and I would go and hunt arrowheads or points in and pounding stones and that sort of thing. So it all seems very natural to me, and I've always wondered why there was so little attention given to this area. Everyone in Georgia knows of the Moye Mounds and the various other mounds in the state, but practically no one knows of these mounds, and it sort of gave me an inferiority complex. But as we learned more about this site and realized what a tremendous scope there was here, we began to realize that this is maybe one of the largest cities in prehistoric times in the southeast. It's sort of gratifying to see the site come its due finally. It's been obscured throughout the years.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks very much for being with us, and we're going to look forward to coming back, and we want to be a part of this too.
Well, good.
And let the people in the country see how it develops and so forth, and who knows, when you get it ready, maybe someday make a trip and be able to go through it.
Well, come back as often as you want.
Real good. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Patala Creek, incidentally, is about 200 or 300 yards in this general direction down here. And just a little ways behind us here, there's another little natural terrace that drops off, and then it gets kind of swampy from there down to Patala Creek. But this area all out in here was apparently farmed by the Indians at one time and then by the European settlers at a later date. So this was plowed, I'm figuring at least to at least a few more feet back here where this other little natural terrace drops off, which you can't see for the growth there now. But this was apparently cultivated, so everything here in the top 6 or 8 inches is disturbed by the plowing, it's disturbed by root action, animal burrows, so forth, and you're constantly fighting all kind of conditions when you're excavating to try to determine exactly what you have. You're fighting all the elements, you're fighting, it's either too wet or too dry. It seems like all the time. It's very seldom ever just right. I told Buzz a couple of weeks ago that when I was down, it was almost like a brick here because we'd left the plastic off, and the sun actually hits this about the hottest part of the day, about 1:30, 2 o'clock. It shines on it for 2 or 3 hours, and it just bakes it. So I put the plastics back over, and that helps sort of retain some of the moisture, so it's not quite as bad this morning.
Don, have you told them how long you've been digging here?
No, I'm not going to tell them that.
Archaeology is slow and meticulous work.
I didn't tell them that it's. I will tell them. It's been about 3 years. But I did tell them that we didn't dig every day, or even every week. So we miss some weeks some days. And we're doing other things part of the time that we are here.
Somebody asked me earlier, who did all of this clearing out here? It can be. I can point at 2 people, Don Gordy and Buzz Cornwell over here. And they've done 99.9% of it. I claim 1/10 of 1%.
Why? How are they associated with the museum?
They are strictly very faithful volunteers.
And live in town and just drive out here and do
Don has worked.
I live 100 miles from here.
Don has worked for me for
a long time.
5 or 26 years. He was originally an archaeologist with the University of Georgia, and we had a cooperative project down here in 1967. The University of Georgia sent Don down, and we just sort of held on to him ever since.
Getting back to the mound construction, this be upside down for you folks on this side, but say this is original ground level, and the Indians come in and bring some soil and build it up, say 3 or 4 feet high, and put a structure, or maybe 2, on the top of that summit. And then and a change, or 20 or 30 years later, whatever, a change, chiefs or priests or whatever, they decide to tear these buildings down, burn them. They bring in more dirt and build it up and do the same thing later. And you just get a pancake style, build up of, and that's why this one is so much higher than, say, this one or some of these others.
Partly a function of age, in other words. It's probably the oldest mound on the site.
Right.
Been added to over the
Right.
generations.
How do you protect that from rain when it didn't have a torrential and it will fill up on it, but you cover it over with?
We cover it over with plastic, basically, and that helps protect it from the drying out so much, and it helps protect it from erosion, too.
Have you done all?
Have you prevented some drilling? If I was you, I couldn't wait no more. I'd have to drill a hole.
Well, that's one of the things that we have to work hardest at on beginning archaeology students. Yeah. We call it the China syndrome. You may have heard the phrase before.
Have you done all of the digging with that little thing in your pocket? That.
Yes, ma'am.
You dig all of that with that.
That's right.
You've done well.
Well, no, I take that back. Sometimes I did use a grapefruit knife.
Frank, you just messed up the concept. I thought I understood you to say that all of the platform mounds were the same height.
They're the same elevation. I don't
That's
know
what
that
I mean,
for sure.
same elevation.
Yeah, they're different heights from the ground level. But what Mac is talking about is that we were surveying the top of this mound one time, and just for the heck of it, I swung my transit around and shot it at Mound D. The one on the north end of the site, what is it, maybe 1,000 feet away? It's within about 6 inches of being exactly the same elevation, even though it's only 10 feet high up here and 45 feet high here. They're the same elevation.
So maybe when they built their mounds up, they built them all up equally, so they'd all stay the same height.
That's a possibility too.
Yeah.
But when I say the older a mound is, the larger it is, the more likely, the higher it is. I think that's generally true. Now, there may have been two things playing here at the same time, both age and elevation. One of the things that you have to reconcile yourself to in prehistoric archaeology is there are always going to be hundreds of questions that you have that you never get answered. One of my favorite jokes, that there's sort of a division between prehistoric archaeology and historic archaeology. I say that I do a good amount of historic archaeology, digging up the remains of our ancestors. By that I mean mostly buildings and so forth. But I find historic archaeology very frustrating. I can dig up an artifact here and never know what it is, and it bothers me a little bit. I can dig up an artifact that my great-great-grandfather might have buried in the ground. I don't know what it is, and it drives me crazy.
One thing about this pit in here that we look for is some of the changes in color. And if you'll notice, there's a change in color here. We don't know what was burnt there, but there was a burn here at one time. Off on this side, you'll see this lump sitting up on that thing. We believe that was possibly old daub off from a building.
Wall plaster, yeah.
It did not burn, and it's salt. I mean, it's yellow looking. I don't know whether you can tell it's as opposed to the red over here. It may be. Well, it's kind of gotten all. You see that lighter color there? It's basically that lighter color. And if it had burned, it would have been dark red. Or reddish.
Don, one of the questions that was asked earlier was, where did all the dirt come from for the mounds?
Yeah, there are several bar areas, or bar pits, what we call bar pits, over along this edge, and of course there's some up on the north edge of the site too. But the dirt, most of the dirt from these mounds apparently came from right over here. There's another little stream right over here, and then there's a gradual drop off in a little bank between here and the stream. So they were cutting back into that bank.
They mean stream here that feeds the Tall Creek.
It goes into the Tall. It's just small.
Yeah, give y'all a little history lesson in language. All of you, I'm sure, have heard of borrow pits. Does anybody know the origin of the term? No. It was, in England, they had mounds as well, and they were called barrows. And a barrow pit was a hole you dug in the ground to build a barrow with. So a barrow pit is a hole in the ground technically to build an Indian mound with around here. Although the term's used for everything else too.
Is that wheelbarrow? The term, the
Yeah.
wheelbarrow,
Yeah.
the name would
Right.
be the carrier from
To carry the earth, yeah.
We've got to hurry. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Don.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Buzz.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thank you.
Glad y'all could come. Hope you enjoyed it.
We sure did.